Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out to dial in today. I know that for some of you, this is quite late at night. If you're dialing in from the States, we've got people dialing in from Asia where it is still very early morning for you. So thank you for carving out some time in your day. We've got a very short session together. We're going to talk about this topic that, hey, we've all heard a lot about in the media over the last little while, this discussion around the metaverse. I'm going to unpack like what is it? What does it mean? And regardless of the industry you're in, how do you make sure you're ready for this like as a macro trend that will shape the next couple of years? So just before we dive into the content here today, I want to have a little bit of fun with you. We're going to kick off with a little bit of a game, which I often do at presentations, be they sort of virtual in this format or live, just to get like people's heads in the zone. This is a game we're going to play just to sort of set the scene for what we're going to cover in the next few minutes, called Bizarre Tech Trivia. Okay, so this is trivia that relates to what we're seeing happen in the metaverse and VR right now. Now, those of you who were in a session I ran a few weeks ago for the Human Resources Institute, you may well know the answer to this question because I asked you this same question a few weeks ago. So we're going to testing your memories in the next few moments. But here's the question I'd love you to answer in a few moments. Just jump into the chat thread and it's going to be multiple choice. So A, B, C, or D. Okay, here's the question that I wanted to ask just to get us in the zone to talk about the metaverse here today. So the question is, what was the record price paid for metaverse real estate in March 2022? So A, B, C, or D, pop it into the chat thread once you think you've figured out what this is. Was it $510,000, A? Was it B, $1.6 million? Was it C, $2.7 million? Or was it D, $4.3 million. So I'm curious what your sense on this is. We've got a whole lot of B's and C's, a couple of D's that are coming through here. How interesting. So a lot of people are giving C. C seems to be the most common answer. Now, you may be surprised to hear this. And in fact, I wonder how many of you think there should be like a fifth option, which is if you pay more than $1 for metaverse real estate, you have overspent on metaverse real estate, okay? But if we'll just look at the four options up on the screen behind me here, the correct answer is actually D, $4.3 million for real estate that isn't even real, that doesn't even exist in the real world. And I mean, it's interesting when you look at this as a trend, and we'll unpack a few of these trends as we go along in this time together today. It'd be easy to dismiss this because it is a little bit bizarre. It's hard to get our heads around why someone would do this. And yet my encouragement to you is we cannot afford to dismiss this entirely as a bit of a blip. Even though it does have, let's be honest, the faintest whiff of Ponzi scheme about it, okay? But the reason we can't afford to ignore this is because we are seeing an entire financial ecosystem right now developing to facilitate transactions just like this. In fact, early this year, we saw JP Morgan open the world's first bank branch in the metaverse. So if you're wondering, like, what does a bank branch in the metaverse look like? I will show you. This is what a bank branch in the metaverse looks like. Randomly, there's a tiger that just roams around the branch. I don't know why that's the case, but I mean, there's a whole lot of quirky stuff happening in these virtual realms right now. And I've got to tell you, JP Morgan are not alone. You look at what Fidelity have done in the last little while, a number of Asian banks in terms of entering this VR space. And this is a space that is really hotly contested right now. And we ain't seen nothing yet. But as we look at this whole discussion of the metaverse and the use of virtual reality, I wonder how many of you, if you're really honest, still don't quite get it. You've read the news coverage, maybe you've had a couple of conversations with colleagues or clients, but you're still not quite sure what this whole thing is about. So just get a bit of a sense of where you're at as you dial into this session today. I want to get you to rate your understanding or knowledge of the metaverse right now. So be honest if you can. So like 1 is you're oblivious. You're like, I've heard the term, but I have no idea what it means. And 10 is like, I'm pretty across it. I've got a bit of an idea of what's happening in this space. So if you had to rate from 1 to 10, jump into the chat thread. Where are you right now on this scale? So, I mean, even look at this, the variety. We've got people who are 9s and then a lot of people who are like 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s. And for those of you who are like 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, can I just encourage you? A lot of us are in that boat right now. And the reason for this is, even though the term metaverse has been around for a few decades now in the world of science fiction, it only entered the business lexicon in mid-2021. This is a relatively new concept. So it's understandable that for a lot of us, even though there's been a lot of media coverage and hype about it, there's still a lot of confusion as to what the metaverse actually is and whether it's really something we need to pay attention to. So before we launch into some of the content, I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of what the metaverse is and what it looks like, just to sort of make this a little bit tangible for some of us. So if you have a quick look on the screen behind me here, this is a quick video that I edited up in the last few days, just to sort of give you a sense of what these virtual worlds, because that's what the metaverse is. It's a virtual reality rendering of the real world, what this looks like and how it's functioning right now. So have a quick look up on the screen here.
The metaverse is difficult to define. It's usually described as online spaces where people socialize, work, and play as avatars, digital representations of their identities. Meta and other companies tout the metaverse as an evolution of the internet, a virtual world that parallels our lives in the real world. If you're unfamiliar with the term, virtual reality refers to entirely digital spaces that are accessed through hardware like the Oculus headset. These headsets use special lens technology, cameras, and motion tracking controllers to fully immerse you in their digital worlds, where objects can seem real even when they aren't.
Now, I should just be right up front here. It is deeply ironic that I would be someone talking about this as a trend. And my wife will tell you I am not a high-tech person. I don't even have like a smartwatch, okay? In fact, when I ordered my headset, so the headset you just saw in that video, which is one of the Oculus headset now called Meta Quest 2, that's the name of this headset, it arrived from Amazon and sat in a box next to the front door for like 5 days. Because I'm like, I really should get to that. I should figure this out. Whereas if I was a 16-year-old, that thing arrives and it's straight out of the box. It's like excitement. Okay, for me, it's like it's a task I've got to get to. So if you're in that boat and this all just feels like a lot of hard work, it's okay. But just stick with me as we go along here. So what my focus is not the technology. Okay, my focus is the impact on strategy and what this means for industries and businesses rather than just the technology side of things. And to be really candid, up until even March this year, I was a bit of a skeptic. I was like, is this metaverse thing just like a fever dream from the tech world, or is this actually something we really need to pay attention to? I was quite skeptical. I thought it was a whole lot of hype. My thinking began to shift when I began to read some stuff from people I respect in this space who said, you know, there is really actually something going on here. In fact, one of the people I paid most attention to when he began to talk about this as a trend is a guy named Mark Whitten. Now, if you've not heard of Mark Whitten before, he used to head up Xbox for Microsoft for years. So he's lived and breathed this sort of technology in the gaming world, which is where a lot of this has come out of, for a long time. So I sat up and paid attention when here's what he said in February this year. He said, the metaverse will be the single biggest platform revolution we've seen. Bigger, he said, than the impact of mobile devices and the internet. Now, even if he's half right, this is massive. This is something we cannot afford to ignore. And he goes on to say that every Fortune 1000 company will need to have a metaverse strategy in the coming few years. And as we look at this question of what does a metaverse strategy look like, if we put meat on the bones beyond just the understanding the technology, what does this look like from a business or industry perspective? I think the most valuable research in this regard was released in June this year by the crew at McKinsey's. I would highly recommend you get a copy of this report. If you just Google the title, it's a value creation in the metaverse. There's some great content in this report from McKinsey. As the name suggests, it's all about value creation, not technology for technology's sake. How do you use these new technologies to actually derive value for you and for your customers or clients or for your marketplace? And if you look at this data from the McKinsey study, some of the most important data points to me that stood out. Number one is, and bear in mind, this was released in June 2022. Okay, so only halfway through the year, we'd already seen $120 billion of investment into the metaverse and related technologies. That's double what we saw in the entirety of 2021. So there's a real focus on this right now from an investment perspective. Another headline stat that really stood out to me was this one, that the metaverse by 2030 will be a $5 trillion market in terms of market value. Now, to give you some context, that is about the equivalent market value of the third largest economy in the world, which is Japan. This is massive, okay? And interestingly, and I know there's someone dialing in from Citibank today for this event. So the Citigroup, their prediction is that actually is probably a bit of a lowball number. So their expectation is by 2030, the metaverse in terms of market value will be closer to $13 trillion. So, I mean, this is something we've got to really pay attention to. But if we just come back to McKinsey's modeling, because I think it's probably a more accurate one in terms of where we're going to see this be by the end of the decade. But even at a $5 trillion market value, these are some of the industries that will see this take off first in. So it may be tricky to see if you're, depending on how big the screen is you're viewing this webinar on today. So the industries they mention here are in dark blue, are the ones we'll likely see this take off in first. So banking, manufacturing, professional services, retail, which is a big one, we'll come back to that, telecommunications and media. So this is where we're going to see a lot of growth in the metaverse early on, and the other industries listed there will follow suit later. So if we look at this whole discussion though around where business leaders are expecting this technology to grow, the sentiment analysis that the crew at McKinsey's did, I think, is really valuable. And what they did is they surveyed executive team members across the globe, a whole lot of different markets, to say, like, what is your expectation about the impact the metaverse is going to mean for you? So what's interesting is that 95% of the leaders that they surveyed said they expect the metaverse to be a good thing for their industry. It's going to provide opportunities that don't exist right now, and that's over the next 5 to 10 years. Amazingly, just 7% expect that it's going to have no impact at all. And I think even that 7%, if you talk to them in 5 years' time, may have changed their tune. But significantly, from an economic standpoint, 24% of business leaders expect the metaverse will be responsible for at least 15% of their revenue over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you read the McKinsey study, what you'll notice is that there's a real sense of urgency that comes through in this report. And I think that urgency is well founded because we're seeing this all move so quickly. In fact, one of the people that's interviewed a few times throughout the study is a really great technology thinker named Kathy Hackle. And what Kathy said is this: if you want to wait 2 years to develop a metaverse strategy and start experimenting with this stuff, it might be too late by that point. And so what are we seeing brands and organizations doing right now to start experimenting, to start moving into this space and developing sort of well-formed strategies around the metaverse? So I want to give you just a couple of examples I've been watching in recent months of where we're seeing organizations really sort of take the lead. The first one actually is from the Australian Open. So I actually did an interview on Monday this week with one of the technology leads at the Australian Open, looking at what they've done around using Web3, the metaverse, the creation of NFTs, which they did for the Australian Open this year in January 2022. They created NFTs where you could actually purchase a ball, a digital ball that actually retained the data of the match that ball was from. And we could talk more about sort of how that functioned, but to give you a sense of the economics of this, they produced 6,700 of these digital balls, these NFTs. They sold all of them within about 2 hours. This is like $2 million worth of revenue. Okay, it gives you a sense of just how rapidly the numbers do stack up with this stuff. But what's interesting about what the Australian Open did is they recreated the Australian Open in Decentraland, which is one of the sort of main suburbs, if you want to think of it that way, in the metaverse, one of the main platforms. And what they had is throughout the Australian Open, they had 175,000 people go to the Australian Open through VR, not attending the actual games. And what was interesting is I was chatting with this guy from the Australian Open this week, is he said typically you look at the Australian Open ticket sales, their main market is women aged 40 through to 55. The people who attended the AO in virtual reality were that 175,000, mostly boys or men aged sort of 15 through to 23. This is reaching out to an entire new marketplace they haven't tapped into well before. And to give you context, 175,000 attendees, that's about between 20 and 30% of the whole number of people that turned up to the Australian Open in aggregate. So it gives you a sense of how rapidly this has become a thing that it's actually a massive opportunity for brands like them. From a global perspective, we've seen a brand like McDonald's launch plans to actually open the world's first VR or metaverse fast food restaurant. So you can go into the virtual McDonald's, order your food, it gets delivered to your home in the real world, and you can then eat that food in the real world, but your engagement with the brand actually happens in a VR space. In the automotive sector, I know we've got a couple of automotive brands dialing in today. Hyundai are the first movers in this area. So they actually opened the world's first metaverse car dealership where you can do a full test drive, get a feel for the vehicle without actually having to go to a physical dealership to do so. But from a consumer brands and retail perspective, we're seeing a lot happen in this space. So for instance, Nike launched a thing called Nike Land. So Nike Land is a metaverse world where you can go and engage with Nike products, and it's all sort of very gamified, a whole lot of fun activities. Now, in the first 5 months of Nike Land opening, they've had 7 million visitors to Nike Land. Part of what's driven that engagement is they've had, people who've come into this space and actually run, iconic players have run tutorials for people that have attracted massive interest in this platform. The last example I wanted to just share with you, because I think it's a really interesting one, is what we're seeing in terms of retail for Forever 21. So they actually launched a Metaverse retail store. You could go in and try clothes on and then again order them to be delivered to your home. But in each of those examples we've just looked at, what we're seeing is the metaverse being a place that you can engage with real products and real services that you'll engage with in the real world, but your connection with those brands or products is VR to start with. Where we're going next, okay, and strap in, because this, like, if this is doing your head in already, like, just wait for this. So the thing you're going to hear a lot more about over the next 12 to 18 months is a brand new economic model we're seeing industries already begin to adopt, which is called direct to avatar. Okay, so follow me here. These are products and services designed to purchase, not for you to use in the real world, but for your avatar to wear in a virtual environment. Okay, so I mean, we're seeing a lot of brands, so Ralph Lauren, we're seeing Gucci, we've seen Nike again really go into this space in a big way in the last 4 or 5 months. In fact, a bit of an example, and a few of the audience I've been sharing this with recently, this has really resonated in terms of just making people really sit up and think, what's this all about? Because this is, again, something that many of us sort of find it hard to get our heads around. So up on the screen here is a Gucci handbag. So this is like a real handbag that you can purchase in a store or online and then like wear in the real world. So the sticker price, the recommended retail price for this handbag, $3,400. Now, Gucci rolled out a digital version of this handbag recently. This is a version that you never sort of actually get to wear in the real world. It's just for your avatar to wear over their shoulder as you roam around the metaverse. That's about personalizing your identity in a digital environment. And I'm curious, I want you to think about what the price of the digital handbag might be. So just jump into the chat thread. Do you reckon it would be less than the real version, about the same, or cost more? So less, same, or more? What would your guess be in terms of how much this digital handbag costs? So we've got a couple of people who are like, should be about the same-ish, some think it should be less. I mean, logically, it should be less, you would think, because it's actually not a real bag. And yet, check this out here. The sticker price, $4,115. People are paying more for a bag they never actually get to enjoy in the real world. Now, if that sounds like something that is like just lunacy from your perspective, and I understand if it does, but can I challenge you, the group that don't find this crazy is the younger cohort. If you've got teenage kids in your world who spend time on Roblox or Fortnite, you would know that they are already spending a lot of money right now on digital merchandise to personalize their avatars. These are called skins. Now, in the whole gaming world, so you know, last year, in fact, I had to check this number twice because I thought that can't be right. And yet it is. Last year, the global marketplace for avatar skins, this was like paying to customize your avatar, $40 billion, okay? So this gives you a sense of how much this is already happening. For 15, 16-year-olds, the idea of buying stuff for your avatar to wear to personalize your digital identity, this is not out of the ordinary. In fact, again, if you find this hard to get your head around, this next piece of data might shed some light on why this is a trend that, again, we can't afford to ignore and actually creates a real opportunity for a whole lot of brands. And I would say this next piece of data was probably the most compelling stuff that I've come across in the last 12 months. Okay, and what this research company did late last year is they asked different generations, when do you feel most like yourself in terms of your identity? When do you feel like you are most in keeping with who you are really? Is it online or offline? So if you ask the baby boomers or Gen Xers, they're like, I actually feel much more like myself offline in the real world. When I'm online, I often feel like I'm a bit of a caricature of myself. I don't know how to sort of communicate in a really authentic way. I've got my Facebook or my LinkedIn self, and then my real self is different. There's often that disconnect. And yet, check this out. When they ask millennials, but more importantly, Gen Z or Gen Z, when do you feel most like yourself? Check this out here for Gen Z or Gen Z. They feel most like themselves online, not offline. Now, this is significant, and I should say, a little bit sad, really. Okay, but it gives you a sense that for this group, personalizing your avatar is something they're spending big money to do because that's when they derive their sense of identity more so than the offline world. In fact, if you look at Roblox, for instance, a quarter of players on Roblox will actually customize their avatar or change their skins every single day. So if we look at this question of like how mainstream are these sort of technologies likely to become, because hey, I don't expect there's a whole lot of you who are going to be buying $4,000 digital handbags anytime soon, but how mainstream is this whole metaverse thing going to be? Is it just going to be for the Gen Z or Gen Z group, or is this going to be more mainstream than that? So here's what Gartner's prediction is, and this is significant. Their suggestion is by 2026, not far away, okay, a quarter of us will be spending an hour per day in the metaverse in one form or another. Now, this is massive. The question we'll look at in a few minutes is what are we going to be spending that time doing? And this is where the rubber really hits the road. This is where the opportunity really is. But before we go into that, I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think the biggest roadblocks or barriers will be to the metaverse becoming as mainstream as a prediction that we just saw? I'm curious to see what your sense is. So jump into the chat thread. From your perspective, what are the biggest barriers to the metaverse becoming mainstream? I'll give you just a couple of moments here just to see what resonates from your side. So we've got a couple of people saying generational, so the fact that we've got a lot of boomers who might not be keen. The issue around hardware, Annette has said there. Internet accessibility, parents. I love it. Anita said, understanding what it even is. And I think you're bang on there, Anita. Okay, so we've got a couple of comments around data security and privacy, the price of it. You know what? I think these are all really important. In fact, there was a comment here around the actual goggles themselves making you feel sick or dizzy. The issue of vertigo is actually something that's quite significant for a whole lot of people. So there's a lot of discussions here around the things that are going to stop this from becoming a reality. Now, if you look at what the data is showing us, there are two factors that probably are the most significant in terms of the barriers to this becoming mainstream. And they both start with H, so that makes it easy to remember. The first one is hunger. How much of an appetite or desire is there actually to enter the metaverse? Do people actually really want this? The second one is hardware. The whole accessibility issue in terms of price, internet speeds, and just the physical apparatus required to go into the metaverse, those headsets, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. But if we look at this first issue, the discussion around how much of an appetite or hunger really is there for the metaverse and these virtual realms or virtual worlds, this might surprise you. If you look at it from a professional perspective globally, the expectation is currently 44% of people are like, bring it on. They'd actually quite happily engage in the metaverse or VR worlds to connect with their colleagues or their peers in a workplace context. This will be the killer app. This is the thing that will cause the metaverse to become mainstream in the same way that desktop computers initially were something we had at work, in our offices, at our desks, and then we went, these are actually pretty cool. I should get one of these for the kids to do homework on at home as well. So we had them in the workplace first, then they became something that was mainstream for consumers. The metaverse is likely to be the same. We will see this actually really gain traction first in terms of people using this in the workplace as part of their jobs, and then they'll start to see this spill over to the consumer landscape afterwards. But if you look at how this is already becoming a reality, so if you look at Accenture, for instance, Accenture have purchased 60,000 of those headsets that you saw in the video before for their staff who are beginning their role at Accenture to actually spend the first week or two of their time at the company engaging in a sort of a platform they've called the nth floor, NTH floor. So this is a virtual world that Accenture have created for their staff to engage with each other, to learn about the company, to essentially start their job. That first stage in terms of onboarding and orientation is done using VR. 60,000 headsets at like $400 a pop. That's a lot of coin to invest in this. And if you look at some of the thinking behind why Accenture are doing this, Accenture's CEO, I think, really encapsulates what motivates or has motivated this decision. So the CEO of Accenture, Julie Sweet, said, we're only in the early stages of this whole metaverse thing, just acknowledging that up front. But she said, this is going to move really fast. She said, if companies don't act now, they'll find themselves, and this is key, operating in worlds designed by and for someone else. And this goes back to that discussion around urgency. Like if we don't move relatively quickly, we're going to be responding, okay, and living in worlds or on platforms that others have created for their purposes and trying to fit them to ours. But what I would say is that even though Accenture have built their own VR platform for onboarding and orientation, you actually don't need to do that. There's actually a couple of great platforms right now that I'm seeing clients begin to use, and you'll likely hear a lot more about these over the next little while. So I thought maybe I'll give you a bit of a sense of what the landscape's looking like right now from the use of VR in the workplace, because these are things you'll likely want to be aware of in the next 6 to 12 months. The first of these is a platform called Horizon Workrooms. So this was developed by Meta, or what was Facebook, and I think this will be the one that gets traction first. They're already moving to market in a really aggressive way, and I want to give you a sense of what Horizon Workrooms looks like and how it functions, because this is again one that you're likely to hear about in the next 6 to 12 months. So let's have a quick look up here on the screen. Check it out.
Today we are talking about Facebook's latest addition to its VR metaverse. Facebook this week unveiled Horizon Workrooms, a robust VR co-working platform bursting at the seams with game-changing features that could set the groundwork for a new generation of remote collaboration. The company's mixed reality office can accommodate everyone from smaller independent teams to larger groups using a suite of impressive abilities. Horizon Workrooms includes a variety of useful features, including mixed reality desk and keyboard tracking, video conferencing, wireless desktop streaming, hand tracking, and spatial audio, just to name a few. Upon logging into the press meeting, I found myself surrounded by other users tuning in from across the globe, each of whom brought to life via Facebook's new Oculus avatars. Interactions with others feels incredibly natural thanks to key improvements to character animations and lip syncing, not to mention the excellent use of spatial audio. After just 5 minutes, I felt completely at home in Facebook's virtual meeting spaces. I say meeting spaces plural because Horizon Workrooms features several different rooms designed to meet a variety of needs, whether you're looking to converse, collaborate, or present.
So if you look at this, it's almost like a Zoom call on steroids. I mean, honestly, within 18 to 24 months, there's every chance a webinar like this could well be on a platform like Horizon Workrooms, and I'd be delivering to you as an avatar, and you'd be sitting in the session as if you were sitting at a live conference with a headset on, and it's a much more immersive experience. In fact, one of the terms you will have heard just then was spatial audio. What that means is if you're, let's say, around a boardroom table chatting with a group from your team and you're all in different parts of the country or the world, if someone across the table, if their avatar's sitting over there and they speak, you'll hear them from that direction. And chatting with a colleague of mine who's actually using this right now for her weekly staff meetings, she said it's amazing how within about 4 minutes, you forget. You forget you're in a virtual environment. You feel like you're sitting in a room with your colleagues. And so we've all gotten very used to remote work over the last little while and hybrid work. This is going to probably make that a far more immersive and useful experience than just relying on, for instance, Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Now, as we talk about Microsoft Teams, if your organization is a Microsoft Teams business or organization, you'll probably find the platform you're most likely to use is not Horizon Workrooms. It's this one here called Microsoft Mesh. So Microsoft Mesh is actually designed to integrate with Microsoft Teams. So this is Microsoft's big play in this space. So this would be one to look out for. Another platform that's getting traction in Europe right now and some parts of the US is called Arthur, A-R-T-H-U-R. So those are three I'd encourage you to check out in terms of virtual workspaces. One that I only came across earlier this week, chatting with a colleague of mine who runs technology for one of the big investment banks in Australia here. He said they've got a lot of their team now based overseas in, for instance, the Philippines. And he said it's interesting, for years, the tricky thing was getting hardware over to get their remote staff set up to be able to work with the organization globally. They'd have to set them up with a computer and a monitor and all the rest of it. And typically, he said, we've got staff who they're in environments where you might have like 12 family members in the same house or apartment. It's noisy, it's confusing, it's a difficult place to do work from in a video call format. And he said, what we're actually finding what's really working well is we'll give them a computer, but we also give the staff a headset. And like at $300 or $400, the headset's about the equivalent of buying a monitor anyway. And what they're then using is this platform here. It's called immersed.com. If you haven't seen this one, check it out. This is really interesting because what it does is it replicates your desktop in a virtual environment. So your monitor, your keyboard, your trackpad or mouse will actually look like it would look if you were just looking at your desk, but you can recreate the space around you. And if you've got staff who are in, really chaotic, noisy environments, it's a much more focused space than what they'd be working in otherwise. And, also far more professional perhaps than having their video on if they're not in a professional sort of setting. So these are some of the platforms we're seeing that a lot of organizations are beginning to use. And I think we'll see this really grow fast over the next little while. A lot of this will be driven by sort of a ground up interest. So, staff who are going, can we use this stuff? And so organizations and leaders going, we've got to sort of adapt quickly because we're getting the requests from our team members. But this is not just a bottom up thing, this is also top down. And at an enterprise level, the use of VR and the metaverse is really compelling. In fact, a couple of examples I've been tracking in recent times. The first of these would be the example of Hong Kong International Airport. What they've created is what's often referred to as a virtual twin. This is a virtual replication of their real airport, but in the metaverse. And what they can do is essentially it's like a test bed. They can actually test, changing the pattern or the rhythms of planes coming into gates, how people move around the terminal. If they change the layout, what would the foot traffic, what would that mean for foot traffic in the terminals? If they, for instance, build new sections onto the terminals, what does that mean for the daylight or shadows at different times of the day? They can create all of that virtually before they start experimenting in the real world. And so it's proved incredibly valuable as an experimental platform. Similar example here over in Amsterdam at their major airport have done the same thing, creating a virtual twin. From a manufacturing perspective, look at the example of BMW. So BMW have actually recreated 30 of their factories in the metaverse as a virtual rendering of that factory. And so they can now test new production procedures virtually before putting them into place. And their production planning cycle has decreased. The time has decreased by 30% by doing this. And so there are some really compelling reasons at an enterprise level, but right down to an individual level, to be considering what these technologies might mean over the next little while. But if we look at the second question, if hunger or appetite is one of the themes we need to be aware of, like how keen are businesses and organizations and consumers to use this tech, the other roadblock I touched on briefly before, and it came up in many of the things that you just shared, was the issue around hardware and access. Because this is a big roadblock right now. In fact, there was a piece of research done recently that found for 60% of people, that is the thing that is stopping them being more interested in VR. It's like the headsets that are heavy and hot and awkward and sort of create that massive barrier between you and the world around you. And I think for a lot of people, that's something they don't necessarily want to have as part of their daily life. And hey, for good reason. But if we look at what's happening in this space, this will be really interesting to watch how quickly the hardware discussion develops over the next little while. And this will be a key enabling factor for the metaverse. In fact, a couple of things you may want to sort of keep on your radar. The first was an announcement last week from Lenovo. They're on the cusp of releasing augmented reality glasses that'll actually allow you to engage. It's almost like the metaverse light. So it's engaging in the virtual world by just having a set of glasses on that doesn't take you out of the real world, but overlays over the real world around you these digital assets and information. Another really interesting example coming from Google, and they released this prototype a few months ago now called the Google XR glasses. And these are cool. So what Google XR glasses will allow you to do is if you're speaking to someone who's speaking a different language, it'll actually overlay over the surface, the inside surface of the glasses, what they're saying, but in your own native language. It's like subtitles for everyday life. So it's the equivalent of like if you've got a car with a heads-up display on the steering wheel, on the windscreen, the same sort of thing, but over a set of glasses. So we're seeing a lot of movement in this space. The one to watch, by the way, is Apple. Apple are hinting that by February next year, they'll be launching their own mixed reality set of glasses. And this could be massive. Even some of the hints they've been dropping in terms of this being essentially their main focus. They would love to see in the next 10 years, these glasses make your iPhone redundant. Everything will be done through those glasses as a piece of hardware. So I think that could be a real game changer, the development of devices like that. Another one I've been watching over the last little while, and if you haven't seen this, you may want to check it out, is a thing called Mojo Vision. So MOJO Vision. This is a company in California that for the last 2 or 3 years have been really perfecting the use of smart contact lenses. Okay, so follow me here. These are contact lenses that actually have an LCD display built into them. And so instead of having a set of glasses that overlay information on your field of view, it actually pops up essentially on the surface of your eyeball. Okay, I'm going to show you a video of what Mojo Vision are doing right now. And I'll be curious in a few moments what your sense of this technology is in terms of whether you'd love to get a set or whether you're like, no, hell no, I'm not interested. Okay, I don't want a piece of it. Okay, so I'll be curious to see what your sense of this is. Let's have a look at what Mojo Vision are doing. Check it out.
Imagine if we could replace our screens with something that informs without distraction. Could we see differently, more clearly? Could it help us find that invisible edge when we need it most? Or allow us to connect in crucial moments, providing vital information in an instant? Introducing Mojo Lens, the world's first augmented reality smart contact lens.
Mojo's invisible computing solution will be a platform that gives you everyday superpowers and an invisible edge throughout your day. But before it does any of that, it first has to be a great contact lens that improves your natural vision even when it's off. Mojo Lens built-in display will give you augmented reality wherever you look.
From being able to see in the dark or low light situations, to augmenting your memory with instant information, showing you real-time translations, or giving you a virtual teleprompter.
I mean, it's pretty amazing technology, isn't it? I mean, I often think of when I see that video, those awkward social settings where you see someone, you're like, I know their name, but I know their face, but I have no idea their name or where I know them from. Something like a Mojo Lens would be so super helpful in those very awkward moments. In fact, just jump in the chat thread. Yes or no, would you love a set of Mojo Vision lenses if you were to get some right now? I'd be curious to see who's up for it, who'd actually like to get a set of these. So I've got a few people like, so Paul from the DSA is like, nope, not interested. Okay, look at that. Quite a lot of you are like, bring it on, okay? Okay, we're gonna cut with Jen, so I'd rather have some awkward moments than be a cyborg, which I understand, I get it. Now we're gonna wrap up in a couple of moments, and we've got a few minutes, in fact, just to have a few questions before we wrap up this session. But before we finish, be curious to get a sense of what you're feeling about the stuff we've talked about today is, your emotional sort of response. So in one word, just jump into the chat thread if you wouldn't mind. In one word, how do you feel about these metaverse related trends? If you were really honest, jump into the chat thread. How do you feel about all the stuff that we've talked about over the last few minutes? We've got cautious, crazy. So Grant said excited with 7 exclamation marks. Okay, we've got nervous, scared, unprepared, excited, curiously excited. I love that, Chris. I think you're bang on. That's a good way to describe it. Riley's excited as well. So Alex is like, take my money. Okay, and it's interesting. I mean, even in this chat thread, you get a sense of just the variety of people's feelings about this technology. And if you do find this a confronting thought or something that just all seems too out of the box, my encouragement to you is think about the metaverse the way you thought about the internet back in 1992. Now, if you were alive in 92, and if you weren't, don't tell us because you make the rest of us feel very old, okay? But if you were alive in 92 and like a grown up, you will remember in 92, the internet was slow and clunky. The discussion was like, should we bother getting a website? Is anyone going to make any money out of this whole internet thing? Is it all just a whole lot of hype? Okay, and we look back at that now and think, how a crazy thing to be asking. And yet that's sort of where the metaverse is up to right now. And so even though I understand it can be a bit of a head spin for a lot of us, this is embryonic stages, but it's likely to develop really, really fast. Now, before we do finish up, what I'll do is I'll pop my details up on the screen. If we're not connected already, I know a number of you I'm connected with already on LinkedIn. That QR code is for my LinkedIn profile. So I would just encourage you, reach out, send me a connection request, because there's a lot happening in the space right now. And what I'm doing every morning, and I've been doing this for a number of years now, is I'll do an 8:45 update. So 8:45 a.m. each day, I'll do a quick update of what I've seen come through overnight or in the last day or so in terms of new technology, new data, new trends. So feel free to scan that code, connect on LinkedIn, and keep an eye out about 8:45 every morning. And that'll unpack some of the stuff we're seeing happen in this space. In fact, if you want to have a look at my LinkedIn wall or my posts from yesterday, so yesterday morning's 8:45 update was all about the issue of sustainability. You know, the issue around, we've heard from a cryptocurrency perspective, like what's the carbon emission footprint of all of these technologies. So there was a really great announcement from Ethereum yesterday in terms of a goal of declining their emissions between 95 and 99%. And so there's an article yesterday that I shared in the morning on LinkedIn, just looking at what they're looking to do. So from a sustainability perspective is really, really encouraging. So I'd encourage you to check that out. The other thing we're going to do as a thank you for dialing in today for this session is I had a book come out a few months ago, essentially looking at the trends that will shape the next few years. And many of these are sort of the trends that we've seen accelerate because of the pandemic. And one of those is this use of VR and augmented reality as well. We've seen that really gallop ahead because of the pandemic. And so we're happy to give everyone who's dialed into the session or registered for the session today a free copy of about 5 of the chapters of that book. And it's a digital book, so you'll get this as a downloadable PDF. And these chapters are the ones that speak specifically to the metaverse, VR, Web3, the whole NFT, cryptocurrency discussion. So if you keep an eye out in your inbox in the next day or so, we'll send you a link to download that. And I know for some of you, the question probably is like, what does this mean for us in our industry? That's what I'm doing a lot of right now, is actually helping specific industries gear up for this stuff. So if that'd be useful to arrange a conversation in terms of what this looks like for you, feel free to let us know when we send that link to you for the download of the book, if that'd be a useful starting point for the discussion. But just as we do wrap things up, and then we'll have maybe a minute or so for questions, I wanted to finish our time together today with just a very short quote. And what I love about this quote, and it's been one of my favorite quotes for years, okay? What I love about it is that this quote is old, like really old, but it's never been more relevant than today, particularly as we consider the pace of change with this whole metaverse discussion. And it's a quote from the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who put it beautifully when he said, resisting change is a little bit like trying to hold your breath. Even if you are successful, it is not going to end well, okay? And that'd be my simple encouragement to you. I understand that for a lot of us, this is confronting, it's out of the box, it's stuff that we haven't grown up with, so it can be a bit disconcerting. What we can't afford to do is ignore or resist these changes. How do we embrace them? Make sure we put sensible guide rails around ethics and morality, all the rest of it, but make sure we're actually embracing the opportunities that are ahead for all of us.